Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to mastering complex topics, where we extract the absolute essential knowledge from the source material and present it as a fascinating story.
Today, we are opening the historical vault on one of the greatest and perhaps most frustratingly mysterious urban cultures the world has ever seen.
We are talking about the Harappan civilization.
Our mission is a thorough deep dive into the Indus Valley culture. This was a civilization that was, massive in scale, astonishingly advanced in its engineering.
And yet so subtle in its display of power, especially when you compare it to its contemporaries in Egypt and Mesopotamia.
Exactly. We're focusing on what's called the mature Harappan phase, which flourished from approximately 2600 to 1900 BCE.
And that timing is so crucial for you to visualize this. When we talk about Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, we're talking about cities that were thriving at the exact same moment the Great Pyramids were being built in Egypt.
And when powerful Sumerian city-states were exchanging letters and, fighting wars in Mesopotamia, its discovery didn't just add a chapter to history.
It completely rewrote the book. It revolutionized our understanding of organized civilization in South Asia, pushing the known timeline back by an incredible 2.5 millennia.
Right. And the sources we're drawing from today, they offer a really comprehensive overview, a true specialist's inventory. We're going to cover everything from the rather awkward initial discoveries,
All the way to their sophisticated architecture, the massive trade networks, their specialized crafts, and of course the big controversies around its political structure and how it all ended.
Exactly.
So our big mission for you, the listener, as we dive in, is to understand this paradox. How did this immense, standardized, and highly urbanized, yet seemingly peaceful culture manage to function for 700 years?
And across a territory larger than any other contemporary civilization.
And what surprising details about their daily life and power structures are revealed through the archaeological record, even though their writing remains, a complete mystery to us.
Okay, let's get into it.
The story of how this civilization was rediscovered is just fascinating. It's a tale of adventurers, deserters, and archaeologists who repeatedly stood on the edge of a monumental truth and just walked away.
It really is. And it starts, bizarrely enough, with a deserter from the East India Company.
A deserter?
Yes.
Oh.
In 1826, a man named Charles Masson, he became an explorer and adventurer, and he found himself standing on these immense mounds at Harappa in the Punjab. And he was convinced the site was incredibly ancient and significant.
So he wrote about it, but I'm guessing nobody listened.
Not for a long, long time.
Yeah.
His hunch was basically dismissed for the next century. The crucial moment of oversight, though, came decades later with Alexander Cunningham.
Who would go on to become the first Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, the ASI.
That's the one. Cunningham visited the site in 1872, and he was, to put it mildly, utterly dismayed by what he saw.
Because he found railway contractors, right, building lines across the Punjab.
Yes, and they had discovered a massive, convenient, and completely free quarry of ready-made bricks. They were literally dismantling the ancient city.
Shoveling tens of thousands of these ancient, perfectly fired bricks into their railway ballast.
It's mind-boggling. The earliest physical evidence of this civilization was being used as free gravel. That one terrible oversight truly set archaeology in the region back decades.
Wow. But Cunningham did find something, didn't he?
He did. He managed to collect some stone tools, pottery, and most importantly, an engraved seal. This seal had a bull on it and some strange pictographic writing.
The famous Harappan script.
But here's where his own knowledge became a barrier. He concluded the seal had to be foreign, maybe Greek or Babylonian, and his reasoning was that the bull depicted on it didn't have a hump.
Because the humped zebu bull was what he knew from Indian culture.
Exactly. His judgment was based on existing cultural norms, which stopped him from recognizing that this artifact belonged to a completely unknown, much older and unique Indian civilization.
It seems like the early ASI leadership just wasn't ready for a civilization this old. The sources point out this general unenthusiasm in the early 20th century.
Oh, absolutely. One officer, Pandit Hirananda Sastry, actively questioned the point of even excavating Harappa. He thought it was insignificant.
And another one, D.R. Bhandarkar, looked at the mounds of Mohenjo-daro and casually estimated it was only about 250 years old.
The scale of what they were dealing with was just incomprehensible based on the historical narrative they were operating under.
So who finally got the work started?
It was local supervision that pushed it forward. Daya Ram Sani started the excavations at Harappa in 1920, and our deep energy began at Mohenjo-Daro in 1921.
And it took them a few years of digging just to realize the sheer vastness and the uniformity of the two sites.
It did. And finally, in 1924, John Marshall, who was the Director General of the ASI at the time, made the formal, international, and dramatic announcement, almost a full century after Misson's initial observation.
And just like that, the world was forced to rewrite the history books, placing Indian civilizations squarely alongside Egypt and Mesopotamia.
So once they found these massive planned cities, the obvious question became, well, what defines this as a civilization? How do we even categorize it?
And for decades, the go-to framework for that came from V. Gordon Childe in 1950 with his concept of the urban revolution.
Right. Childe wanted to define that moment of transition when a large village becomes a true urban center. And he was careful to say this revolution wasn't sudden or violent, but a long process.
He laid out 10 criteria, based heavily on the Mesopotamian model, that he believed were prerequisites for a true city.
Let's walk through them because they really help us measure the Harappans against that global standard.
Okay, so first up is demography. You need a larger, denser population than you'd find in a farming village.
And second, that population requires a change in labor, the development of full-time specialists, craftspeople, merchants, officials who do not produce their own food.
Which brings us to number 3. Since those specialists need to eat, there has to be a system for agricultural surplus to be concentrated, usually, handed over as tax or tribute to some kind of elite.
And fourth, that concentrated wealth results in monumental public buildings, things like massive temples or palaces that symbolize the concentration of power.
Fifth is the ruling elite itself, the people who get the surplus, but in exchange, they provide organization, security, planning, all the essential centralized services.
Then you have the administrative and intellectual necessities. Sixth, the invention of writing or numeral notation for administration, keeping track of taxes, supplies, trade.
Seventh, this reliance on numbers naturally leads to the development of exact sciences, like geometry for building things and arithmetic for taxes.
Right. And eighth, all that specialized labor allows for sophisticated artistic styles that define the city's culture.
Ninth, cities need long-distance trade to get resources that aren't available locally.
And finally, number 10, the political organization has to shift from being based on kinship, clan structures, to a state structure based on residence. You belong because you live there.
So Childe's list, while it was foundational, it really assumed the Mesopotamian model would be universal. What was it about the Harappan sites that immediately kind of broke his criteria?
Well, that's it exactly. Scholars immediately started critiquing the list. They questioned the very word revolution, for one. But more pointedly, in the Harappan context, you have things like standardization, specialized crafts, large populations.
All clearly met.
Right. But others, like obvious, massive religious temples or clear evidence of complex mathematical text, they're either missing or impossible to deduce from the archaeological record.
And are all 10 points equally important? I mean, is having a sophisticated art style as vital as centrally controlling the food supply?
That's the core of the academic debate. It moved toward more nuance. Some scholars, like Robert McCann Adams, emphasize social factors, the crucial interdependence between the city and its hinterland.
The idea that the city relies on the countryside for food, and the countryside relies on the city for what? Protection? Redistribution?
Precisely. Others, like Gideon Sjoberg, argued that political factors were the most important, specifically the rise of centralized empires. He thought that kind of political control was the glue needed for everything else to thrive.
So the Harappan sites force us to see this complex interplay. They had the scale and the economic control, but they seem to lack the explicit militarism, the political display.
Yes. The sources make it clear that while Childe gave us the checklist, Harappa provides the asterisk. It shows that a complex civilization can emerge and thrive even when some of his biggest boxes remain unchecked.
So the moment we start talking about the Harappans, we just have to grasp the sheer scope of this civilization. It's often called the Indus Valley Civilization.
But that name, as the sources clearly point out, is just vastly too limited.
Why is that?
It's misleading. Because while the major cities Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, were on or near the Indus River and its tributaries, the cultural zone extended so much further. We estimate the area covered was between 680,000 to 800,000 square kilometers.
Which, to put that into perspective, is significantly larger than contemporary Egypt or Mesopotamia.
Much larger. And that massive territory is why some scholars prefer the term Sindhu-Sarasvati civilization.
Right, because a large cluster of sites were located near the ancient, now mostly dried up, Gagar-Hakra river system.
Which is often identified with the mythological Sarasvati River. But the standard academic convention still remains Harappan civilization, named after Harappa, the first site they identified.
What's truly astonishing is the cultural uniformity they maintained across that enormous distance for over 700 years.
Absolutely. There was a clear, definable material checklist that linked a site in the far north, like Manda, to one in the south, like Malvin.
So what was on that checklist?
Well, it included specific types of ceramics. A typical red pottery painted with very precise black geometric and natural designs. But the most powerful indicator of political or economic control was the standardization of building material.
The bricks.
The bricks. All the sites, across hundreds of thousands of square kilometers, used bricks, both mud brick and fired brick, that adhered almost universally to a 1.2.4 ratio.
That brick ratio is just incredible. It tells a story of logistical genius. It implies either massive centralized production or just unbelievably strict, shared regulatory standards enforced across vast distances.
Precisely. Other traits on the checklist include things like terracotta cakes.
Which are these small, often triangular pieces of terracotta whose function we're still debating.
Right, and standardized stone and copper artifact types. And we can't forget the isolated trading post of Shortakai, way up in Afghanistan, which really shows the Harappans' reach for resources.
Now, early theories, very influenced by colonial thinking, sort of assumed that any sophistication must have been borrowed. John Marshall and later Mortimer Wheeler often suggested these diffusionist theories.
The idea of either actual migration from Sumer or, at the very least, the migration of the idea of a city?
But the sources today firmly reject this.
Overwhelmingly, the evidence points to an indigenous development. I mean, if you look closely, the Harappan civilization is fundamentally different from Mesopotamia. They had a completely unique script, for one.
Not cuneiform.
Not at all. And their cities lacked the monumental ziggurats and the massive centrally managed canal irrigation systems that really defined Sumer. The settlement layouts were distinctly different.
So it wasn't a copy-paste job.
It was a long-term evolutionary process. The roots of the mature Harappan phase trace all the way back to settled farming communities in Baluchistan from the 7th millennium BCE. The immediate prelude, though, was the early Harappan phase, from about 3200 to 2600 BCE.
So what was happening during this early Harappan phase that set the stage for the massive integrated civilization that came later?
This was the proto-urban period. The raw materials, the technological expertise, the basic settlement structure, it was all already there. We see large fortified settlements, early craft specialization, and the use of wheeled transport starting to emerge.
Let's use a specific site to paint that picture. What about Kot Diji?
Kot Diji is a key example. It was strongly fortified with a massive limestone wall, the layout already segregated space, with a citadel complex separated from a lower residential area. And they had expertise in crafts and were using distinctive pottery designs.
Including early versions of that fascinating horned deity motif.
Yes, and pipe leaves. Symbols that would become central to the later mature Harappan ideology.
And Kalibangan in Rajasthan provides concrete evidence of their agricultural sophistication hundreds of years earlier.
Exactly. Kalibangan Piriai shows a settlement already surrounded by massive mud brick fortifications. And critically, we see a pre-existing standardization of materials, using bricks in a 3.2.1 ratio.
A little different from the later 1.2.4, but standardized nonetheless.
Right. And just south of the site, archaeologists found the most remarkable thing: an ancient plowed field surface, perfectly preserved, showing both north-south and east-west furrow marks.
Which suggests they were using sophisticated simultaneous cropping strategies centuries before the major cities coalesced.
It was a gradual cultural convergence. The sources confirm continuity in basic items: certain pottery types, toys, bangles, and the persistence of ideological symbols. This tells us the Harappan civilization was an organic evolution, a local response to the ecological and economic potential of the region.
When you look at the architecture of the mature Harappan sites, the sheer level of municipal planning is just. It suggests an obsession with order and efficiency that few ancient societies could match.
It really does. The idea of the perfect grid has been revised a bit. The layouts weren't mathematically perfect grids.
But they were undeniably planned and executed.
Absolutely. The general model, which you see at Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, and Kalibangan, had two main parts: a raised citadel complex, often for public and administrative structures, and a larger lower city for the bulk of the population.
D'Oliveira, though, was a bit different.
Yes, D'Oliveira showed a regional variation. It stands out with three main divisions: the Citadel, a middle town, and a lower town. It reminds us that while they had core principles, they were flexible enough to suit local geography.
But the standardization of materials remained rigid. We talked about the 1.2.4 brick ratio, but how they were laid also points to some serious engineering knowledge.
It points directly to highly skilled masons working under strict quality control. They used standardized mud bricks and burnt bricks, and critically, the bricks were often laid in the English bond style.
What does that mean?
It means the long and short sides of the bricks, the headers and stretchers, alternated in each course. It creates exceptional structural strength and uniformity. To achieve that level of quality control across hundreds of sites required an incredible long-term administrative commitment.
And this commitment to order extended right down to the individual household, with a really strong focus on privacy.
Yes, houses were typically built around a central courtyard, which was the main area for light, air, and domestic activities. But the focus on privacy is so interesting. Doors and windows almost never face the main streets.
They opened onto side lanes.
And if you stood on the side lane, your view into the central courtyard was almost always blocked by an internal wall built right inside the doorway. It suggests really strong social norms about personal and family space.
Okay, if we were to give the Harappans an award for ancient technology, it would have to be for sanitation and water management. They were centuries ahead of their time.
This is truly the defining feature of their urbanism. They had these remarkable integrated drainage systems. And the genius was in the separation of the systems.
Wastewater and sewage chutes were completely separate from the drains used for rainwater.
Completely separate. And the engineering of the public systems was highly advanced. The main drains weren't just open ditches, they were covered, using heavy stone slabs or even corbelled arches made of brick.
And these covered mains carried sewage right out of the city walls.
Right. They also used rectangular soak pits at regular intervals to collect solid waste, which speaks to a maintenance system. Someone had to regularly clean those out to prevent blockages.
And the commitment to personal hygiene mirrored that public system.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Every second house had a designated bathing area, usually near the well. These floors were built to be watertight and sloped, often with bricks set on edge, leading to a small outlet that connected directly to the street drain.
We mentioned Mohenjo-Daro's obsession with accessible water. Just how many wells did they have?
The numbers are staggering. Mohenjo-Daro is estimated to have had over 700 wells.
700.
Which is an average of about one well for every 3 houses. Compare that to later European cities that struggle with clean water for millennia. It suggests an enormous investment in domestic comfort and public health.
But maybe the most spectacular feat of water engineering was at D'Oliveira, located in the harsh, drought-prone Rann of Kutch.
D'Oliveira had a unique and phenomenal water harvesting system. It's situated between 2 seasonal streams, so the city had to capture every single drop of monsoon rain.
So they built dams and these massive, deep, stone-lined cisterns or reservoirs.
At least 16 of them. And these weren't just big pits. They were expertly channeled to preserve rainwater, allowing them to sustain a huge urban population in an otherwise arid zone. It really highlights their ability to adapt monumental engineering to extreme environmental challenges.
Let's zoom in on the most famous city, Mohenjo-Daro, and its citadel structures.
The citadel there has the most famous buildings. Chief among them is the Great Bath. It's a masterful piece of engineering built with finely fitted baked bricks set with gypsum mortar.
And sealed with a thick layer of natural bitumen to make it completely waterproof, one of the world's earliest known uses of that.
Right. And the interpretation is still that this was for high-status elite ritual purification.
Near the Great Bath is the largest building on the Citadel, sometimes called the College of Priests.
It's a tentative identification based purely on its sheer size and its location near the ritual complex. It suggests some kind of elite administrative or residential function tied to ideology.
Then there's the structure that Marshall called the Great Granary. Now, the modern consensus is that it wasn't for storing grain. What does calling it a warehouse tell us about their economy that granary doesn't?
That's a key interpretive shift. Marshall assumed, based on Mesopotamian and Egyptian models, that the state's main role was controlling agricultural output, so a granary.
But they never found any charred grain or storage containers?
Exactly. So if it was a warehouse or just a massive public foundation, it implies the centralized power structure might have focused less on controlling food and more on controlling finished goods, standardized crafts, high-value trade items.
Mm.
It shifts the focus from an agricultural autocracy to more of a mercantile or corporate state.
Moving to Calibangan, we see a focus on community ritual that's quite distinct.
Calibangan is fascinating because its citadel had a southern sector completely reserved for ritual activity, deliberately kept free of houses.
And this is where they found the row of 7 clay-lined pits identified as fire altars.
Right. The pits had ash, charcoal, and terracotta cakes, suggesting community sacrificial rituals. And nearby, they found a pit with cattle bones and antlers, which might point to animal sacrifice. It's also notable that Calibangan's lower city lacked those advanced street drains, using simple soakage jars outside the homes instead.
And finally, Dolivera, which tells the story of enduring stone.
Dolivera is unique for its extensive use of dressed stone blocks for its massive fortification walls, likely because stone was locally available. But what really pushes back the history of South Asian architecture are the remains of highly polished stone pillar bases.
This demonstrates monumental polished stone architecture in the 3rd millennium BCE, a huge early technical achievement.
It does. And then there's the famous inscription, the Dolivera signboard.
A massive public display, which is unique in the Harappan world.
An incredible discovery. It was an inscription of large symbols made by inlaying white gypsum paste into a decayed wooden board. The symbols were enormous, about 37 by 25 centimeters each. Since most Harappan script is on tiny seals, this suggests a civic, public use of writing, maybe announcing the city's name or a proclamation, a crucial, if silent, window into their world.
The foundation of the Harappan economic success was its diversified and abundant agricultural base,
which varied across its vast territory according to the local ecosystem. The core staples were wheat, barley, and sesamum, especially at northern sites like Harappa.
But the southern sites, like Lothal, relied more on rice cultivation.
Yes, and they also cultivated field peas, dates, grapes. An analysis from a site called Balu in Haryana gave us the earliest known cultivation of garlic in the region.
Wow, and their farming techniques were already sophisticated enough to support all those urban specialists.
Absolutely. We know they used the plow thanks to terracotta models from Banawali, and of course that plowed field at Calibangan. They likely relied heavily on flood irrigation in the river plains.
And there's also evidence for small-scale irrigation canals.
At Shortahai, for instance, suggesting they used localized water management where it was necessary.
Animal husbandry was equally vital to their diet and economy.
Domestication was crucial. They raised humped cattle, humpless cattle, water buffaloes, sheep, and goats. Faunal analysis from sites like Shikarpur shows that cattle bones made up over 77% of all remains, underscoring their primary importance.
And looking at the age the animals were slaughtered tells us how they were used.
Exactly. Sheep and goats were usually killed young for meat, but many cattle and buffaloes survived to old age, which strongly indicates they were essential as draft animals for transport and plowing, and for secondary products like milk.
And what about the enduring controversy over the horse?
The horse remains controversial. Reports of horse bones exist at sites like Lothal and Surkota, but they aren't common.
And the fundamental problem is telling the difference between a true domesticated horse and the local wild half-ass.
It's extremely difficult in the archaeological record. So the scholarly consensus remains that the horse was, at best, marginal in the Harappan economy compared to the omnipresent cattle.
Now, the crafts demonstrate an astonishing level of standardization and mass production.
Take the pottery. It was incredibly efficient, produced on a fast wheel, and consistently covered with a red slip and black painted designs. You see standardized shapes like the dish-on stand and these peculiar cylindrical perforated jars.
The function of which we're still debating: storage, brewing.
We're not sure, but the uniformity suggests centralized training and quality control.
Their metallurgists were also highly skilled, even if their use of bronze lagged behind Mesopotamia at first.
Copper was their primary metal, and they knew how to alloy it with arsenic, tin, or nickel to produce harder tools, and they got better over time. At Mohenjo-Daro, the percentage of tools made from true bronze increased from 6% in the lower levels to 23% in the upper levels.
But the true technical marvel and the ultimate status symbol had to be the manufacturing of those carnelian beads.
Oh, absolutely. These long-barrel cylinder carnelian beads were objects of immense prestige. They were even exported and found their way into royal burials in Mesopotamia.
And the process to make them was just torturous, showing an extreme degree of specialized labor.
It really was. It required selecting high-quality carnelian, slowly heating it in kilns for days to deepen the stone's color from a milky pink to a rich, deep red. And then came the drilling.
Using a specialized drill made of a rare, hard stone archaeologists have dubbed ernestite.
Right. And experimental archaeology has shown that even with those drills, drilling a single 6-centimeter long bead took a specialist over 24 hours of steady work.
So that could be 3 to 8-hour days for just one of the longer beads.
If you calculate that labor, the value is just enormous. The full belt of 36 beads found at Aladino would have required an estimated 480 workdays just for the drilling.
So these weren't just ornaments, they were concentrated wealth, markers of the highest status.
And a crucial commodity in their global trade. Which brings us to the seals. They acted as the physical signature of this complex trade network.
Most of them were small, square tablets of steatite carved in intaglio, so the image is sunk into the stone to produce a raised impression.
And their primary role was functional, stamping clay sealings onto packaged merchandise to authenticate ownership and prevent tampering.
They were also personal tokens, acting as amulets or ID for high-status individuals, a kind of pre-monetary authentication essential for a society built on long-distance barter.
The sheer uniformity of artifacts suggests a massive, efficient internal trade network was operating based on a barter system.
And that standardization made it possible. They used a system of precisely calibrated cubical stone weights.
Binary for smaller units, 1, 2, 8, 16, transitioning to a decimal system for larger weights. This uniform system facilitated reliable exchange across the entire culture zone.
They were also adept at sourcing raw materials: copper from Rajasthan, chert blades from Sindh, and carnelian from Gujarat.
And for logistics, land transport relied heavily on two-wheeled carts, which we know from the numerous terracotta models. For water travel, both river and seafaring boats are depicted on seals and tablets.
Let's zoom out to the global connections. How far did Harappan influence really stretch?
Their connections reached Mesopotamia. Cuneiform records from there explicitly mention trade ships arriving from 3 main locations: Dilmun, which is modern Bahrain; Magan, likely the Makran coast or Oman; and Maluha.
And Maluha is what scholars generally agree refers to the Indus Valley region.
Yes. The exports were clearly high-value goods: carnelian beads, gold, copper, ivory, textiles.
And what's the archaeological evidence that backs this up?
We find Harappan seals in Mesopotamian cities like Ur and Kish. But the most significant evidence is the outpost of Shortakai in Afghanistan.
A small Harappan settlement, geographically isolated but with all the classic Harappan features: ceramics, brick sizes, seals.
Its key strategic value was its location near lapis lazuli and tin mines. This strongly suggests Shortakai was established purely for resource acquisition, a specialized trading colony.
Ultimately, though, their trade with Mesopotamia wasn't a lifeline, was it?
No, that's the modern conclusion. The Harappan zone was largely rich in its own resources. The trade with Mesopotamia was important for luxury goods, but it wasn't substantial or intensive compared to the internal trade that truly sustained the civilization.
And that brings us to the great mystery, the Harappan script.
It remains the massive silent challenge of this entire deep dive. It's the great linguistic lockbox of the ancient world.
We know it's a logosyllabic script with 400 to 450 basic signs, but the profound difficulty in deciphering it lies in the sheer lack of text.
Exactly. The source material is agonizingly brief. Most inscriptions are on seals and tablets, and the average length is only about 5 signs. The longest known inscription has a mere 26 signs.
You contrast that with Egypt or Sumer, where you have entire temple walls covered in text, administrative records, royal chronicles.
And the Harappans left us only these tiny administrative snippets.
What we do know about its technical aspects is fascinating, though. It was generally written from right to left.
Yes, and we know that from the clear cramping of the signs on the left side of the seals, where the scribe had misjudged the available space.
And sometimes they used that unusual back-and-forth style.
The Boosterfeedun style, alternating direction with each line. First right to left, then left to right, like an ox plowing a field.
Since we can't read it, what can we deduce about its function from where we find it?
Its function seems purely administrative and economic. It's confined mainly to seals, for trade authentication and identity, miniature tablets, and occasional graffiti on pottery.
The Dullavira signboard is the only evidence of a large public display.
Which suggests the script was not primarily used for literature or law codes or historical chronicles. It was the language of bureaucracy and commerce.
And the script's ultimate fate is a tragic commentary on the civilization's collapse.
It vanished almost entirely by around 1700 BCE. This suggests the system of writing was intrinsically tied to the infrastructure of urban life. It lacked what you might call downward percolation, adoption into religious rituals or widespread societal use, that it needed to survive the de-urbanization process.
Once the administrative complexity broke down,
The need for the script just evaporated.
trying to reconstruct Harappan religion is so speculative because we can't read the script, and unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, we haven't found any structures we can definitively call temples.
Right. And the sheer number of terracotta female figurines found led early scholars to immediately hypothesize a widespread mother goddesses cult likely tied to fertility.
But the interpretation of those figures has changed a bit recently.
It has. The fact that these figurines were often found broken and discarded in trash heaps suggests they were votive offerings for short-term domestic rituals, not eternal cult images placed in temples.
So more personal than state-sponsored religion.
Exactly. And that brings us to the most famous religious artifact, the Pashupati seal.
This steatite seal from Mohenjo-daro is iconic. It depicts a male figure with a buffalo horn headdress, seated in a yogic posture, surrounded by 4 wild animals.
An elephant, a rhinoceros, a water buffalo, and a tiger. John Marshall immediately interpreted this figure as a proto-Shiva, referencing 2 later Hindu forms, Mahayogi, the great ascetic, and Pashupati, the lord of the animals.
But scholars have aggressively challenged that interpretation.
There are significant challenges. Is the figure truly 3-headed, as Marshall suggested? Is he even definitely male? And crucially, the Shiva of later Hinduism is the lord of domesticated animals, typically cattle, whereas the figure on the seal is with wild beasts.
So regardless of the identity, it's clearly a very important deity or ritual specialist.
Absolutely. Aside from these figures, we know certain trees were sacred, particularly the pipal tree, which is all over the seals, and animals like the bull and the snake held cultic significance.
And then there are the fire altars at Kalibangan and Lothal, which indicate that community and domestic sacrificial rituals were integral to their practice.
And their funerary practices show a lot of variety, but one consistent theme is a lack of excessive display.
Right. We find extended burials, fractional burials, urn burials suggesting cremation. But they were never lavish, especially when you compare them to the royal tombs of Egypt. Grave goods were typically limited to pottery and small personal items.
Which strongly suggests that Harappan society placed a much greater premium on using wealth during life, rather than burying it with the dead.
While they lacked royal tombs and palaces, the differences in house sizes, the complexity of crafts, and those incredible jewelry hoards, they all confirm that clear social differentiation existed.
We can confidently infer different classes. A wealthy elite, probably merchants, landowners, and ritual specialists, followed by craftsmen, officials, and laborers. The structure was stratified, even if it wasn't militaristic.
And what can we reconstruct about their appearance from the sparse sculptures we have?
The iconic priest-king bust and various terracotta figurines show their attire. Men typically wore a dhoti-like lower garment and a shawl or cloak over one shoulder. Women wore skirts, and both sexes wore elaborate jewelry.
And thanks to modern science, we have a very clear picture of their health profile, particularly from the cemetery R37 at Harappa.
That analysis provides invaluable data. The people were robust, relatively healthy agriculturists. Their most common ailment was arthritis, particularly severe arthritis in the neck.
Which is crucial because it strongly suggests high physical labor, specifically carrying heavy loads on their heads over long periods.
Exactly. Trade goods, construction materials, something like that. And like many agricultural societies, they had a relatively high rate of dental cavities.
But perhaps the most powerful data point from that analysis is the biological continuity.
Yes. The analysis of the skeletal remains showed significant biological similarity between the Harappans who built the great cities and the populations living in the region today. There was no sudden influx or replacement of the population.
Which is key because it completely undermines one of the biggest myths about how the civilization ended.
And that brings us to the great political puzzle. This is the paradox. 700 years of remarkable stability and uniformity standard weights, bricks, pottery spread across 800,000 square kilometers. This demands a powerful central political structure.
And yet we see virtually no evidence of warfare, conquest, or the iconography of autocratic rulers like pharaohs. So who was running this show?
Early models, like Stuart Pigot's, suggested a centralized empire ruled by autocratic priest-kings, using the uniformity and monumental works like the Great Bath as proxy evidence of absolute power.
But the lack of military presence and explicit royal display has pushed modern views towards more decentralized theories.
Right. If power wasn't enforced by the sword, it must have been enforced through consensus, ideology, and control over resources.
George Possel's corporate state theory.
Exactly. He suggested a highly disciplined society ruled by councils, maybe of powerful merchants and elite ritual specialists, rather than a single king. Jonathan Knoyer suggested power was dispersed among competing classes of urban elites who controlled different spheres: trade, land, ritual knowledge.
So ideology played a far greater role than brute force. The Great Bath, the standardized script, the unicorn symbol, these were the proxies for power.
Precisely. Power was wielded by consensus and control over what mattered most. And look at the seals again. Over 60% of the seals from Mohenjo-daro feature the unicorn motif.
Why the unicorn?
It likely represented the aristocracy or a specific powerful merchant clan that held a crucial executive role. The less frequent animal motifs, the bull, the elephant, may have symbolized other powerful clans or even the apex rulers. It was a complex oligarchy, maintaining control through strict regulations and a shared ideology, not massive armies.
After 700 years of stability, the urban centers began to unravel around 1900 BCE. We have to start by tackling the most famous but least supported theory, the Aryan invasion.
The invasion theory, popularized by Mortimer Wheeler in 1947, suggested the cities were violently destroyed by invading Indo-Aryan tribes. He cited scattered skeletal remains at Mohenjo-daro as victims of a massacre.
And modern science and archaeology have completely refuted this claim.
There's a comprehensive refutation on multiple fronts. First, there is a total lack of archaeological evidence for military assault or siege warfare at any Harappan site. Second, the skeletons Wheeler cited were found at different levels and dates, unrelated to a single event.
And most powerfully, the biological analysis we mentioned shows skeletal continuity.
The Harappan population did not vanish or get replaced. There was no foreign invasion that destroyed the civilization.
So the end was not sudden and violent, but gradual and environmental. What were the primary environmental stresses?
Natural disasters and persistent environmental change were the culprits. Flooding was a chronic problem, especially at Mohenjo-daro, evidenced by deep silt layers that forced repeated reconstruction.
But the more pervasive disaster, especially in the eastern regions, was hydrological, the rivers changing course.
This is the theory of desiccation and river capture. The vast cluster of Harappan sites in the Gagarhakra Valley suffered a gradual, catastrophic drying up.
Because tectonic movements caused the Sutlej River to be captured by the Indus system and the Yamuna by the Ganga system.
And those were the primary feeders of the Gagarhakra. When they shifted, the entire river system gradually desiccated, leading to a massive reduction in settlements in that area.
The Harappans also inadvertently pressured the environment themselves.
Yes, through long-term environmental overexploitation. Overcultivation and overgrazing eventually reduced the fertility of the soil, and the production of millions of burnt bricks required vast amounts of wood for fuel, leading to excessive deforestation, which destabilized the ecosystem.
The outcome then was not extinction, but a process of de-urbanization.
A gradual breakdown. The late Harappan phase from about 1900 to 1300 BCE, the classic urban features, the seals, the script, the standardized weights, all disappeared or became rare.
And the population shifted dramatically eastward and southward into Gujarat, Haryana, and the Ganga-Yamuna Doab,
where they adapted by diversifying agriculture and forming smaller, regional, non-urban settlements. The civilization didn't collapse, it simply de-urbanized and decentralized.
What an astonishing journey into a civilization that set the standard for urban planning in the ancient world. We've uncovered the immense scale, the commitment to standardization through the humble brick, the engineering genius of their sanitation systems,
and the profound mysteries surrounding their unique corporate political structure and their silent, vanished script.
The stability of the Harappan civilization, enduring for 700 years without the visible apparatus of military coercion that defined its contemporaries, really speaks to a unique, successful system.
It does. Its underlying social order appears to have been achieved through cooperation, sophisticated economic regulation, and a shared ideological framework, rather than overt military force or autocratic rule.
That remarkable stability, followed by a decline driven not by outside force but by changing rivers and persistent ecological stress, leaves us with a compelling final thought as we close this deep dive.
The great urban centers of the Harappan civilization ultimately declined due to these persistent ecological factors, forcing people to migrate and decentralize. And yet, many Harappan traits, from diet to religious concepts, lived on and were absorbed by subsequent cultures. So what can the collapse of such a vast, highly standardized, complex society teach us today about the long-term fragility of complexity when it's faced with unstoppable, persistent ecological change? That's the legacy of Harappa that we continue to explore.